Welcome back. Today we have a new book to explore. It's called No Clear Path. It's a collection of short stories about themes that are dear to my heart, like climate change, injustice, and making life decisions. Not that I consciously decided to write about these themes, it's just that the characters and the story presented themselves in that process we call inspiration. So here is Jerry reading The Walrus That Became a Man, and Consuelo is reading The Cat Who Could Not Read.
No Clear Path. The Walrus That Became a Man. The transition wasn't perfect. He still looked rather like a walrus with a thick torso and a wiry mustache, but he had appendages in the proper places, so he was accepted. However, when he blushed, his face became a dark brown. Everyone remarked on it, yet there he was, a U.S. Senator. No one could remember just how it came about. He was simply there one day, and everyone accepted it. C.I. Wallace smiled to himself at their confusion. He knew he had no right to be there, to be a human. But it had been agreed upon. The walruses of the world had formed a council. It was the first man-like act they had ever performed, but they were desperate. Their sea home was heating up and filling up with spilled oil and garbage. Food was disappearing. They were afraid. After much deliberation, it was agreed that one of them would be chosen to become a human for 1 year. To be effective, their changeling would have to be a white male in the United States Congress. C.I. Wallace began his time as a human with a single-minded purpose. He was not tempted by the act of propagation and was surprised that humans appeared to enjoy the impulse year-round. It seemed to cause all manner of mayhem. Neither was C.I. Wallace tempted by human addictions or moral weakness. However, he did become fascinated by books. Words were such a wonderful human concept. Fortunately, he had arrived with the capacity to read and write English. By day, he researched, lobbied, and fought for the passage of laws to protect the environment, to protect his beloved sea. By night, he read novels. He especially loved the fantasy genre. Thus, it was on the evening he was to transition back to his true form that he sat on the beach. He was content that he had used his year among humans to promote an awareness of dangers of ignoring the consequences of climate change. More needed to be done, but that didn't bear thinking about. So C.I. Wallace decided to spend his last moments reading his favorite book, 9 Princes in Amber. He sighed when Corwin bravely completed walking the pattern, then laid the book aside. A peculiar fizzing gripped him. Spasms shook his body. Dread filled his mind. He consulted his watch. 10:05. He'd missed his transition and was lost to his own kind. He watched the sea rush toward shore and then retreat without him. He was beached on land, never more to know the joys of slipping weightless through the singing sea. He would never find a mate or lounge with his friends on rocks warmed by the sun. His first tears as a human poured down his face. Morning came, and C.I. Wallace stood and brushed the sand from his clothes. He resolved to be brave like Corwin. He would face his challenges. He would fight for awareness and laws that would save the sea and all its wondrous inhabitants. He cradled the book in his arms. It, and others yet to be discovered, would give him other worlds to inhabit when the trial of being a human was too much to bear. He would manage. He would always remember, always in his heart, he would be a walrus.
The Cat Who Couldn't Read. I grabbed the remote and silenced the kitchen TV. I didn't feel like starting my day with more bad news on the environment. That won't do any good, you know. Bad things don't go away just because you ignore them. What? What did you say? I looked at my daughter, who was pushing scrambled eggs around on her plate as though they might magically disappear without coming in contact with her mouth. Jessica looked up from her plate. It wasn't me. Must have been Sam. I looked from my daughter to Sam, our newly acquired cat, who looked like a walking abstract painting, black with a smattering of tan. You aren't exactly a Mona Lisa, a voice in my head said clearly. I've been talking to you ever since I got here, but you never heard me. I guess you're more open in the morning when you're fresh from the dream world. I pushed away from the table and leaned against the sink. I stared out the window into our backyard. Everything looked the same, ordinary. It used to happen all the time, you know, the voice in my head continued. I turned and looked at Sam, who sat watching me with her luminous green eyes. Humans and animals talk to each other. Then humans started thinking they were superior, so we stopped talking to them. That remark reminded me of a woman I saw on TV who said the same thing. She was some kind of pet therapist. Why break the silence now? I asked, not expecting an answer. Surely I was having some sort of breakdown, hallucinating. Maybe it's time we were friends again, the voice said. What? I looked at Sam, who was calmly washing her face. Right. I wasn't talking to a cat. I sat down at the table. Surely I'd imagined the whole thing. Result of the news I just heard on TV. Sam licked her paw and leisurely washed her face, oblivious to my presence. Now that she had my attention, I think she relished the moment of power. I waited her out. Eventually, she repeated, "Maybe it's time we were friends again." I smiled encouragement, and she continued, "You really have mucked things up. You raped your resources, and now you have bad air, bad water, bad soil, and diminishing assets. The icebergs are melting and storms are brewing. You really need to get a grip on things or are going to get very bad indeed for all of us." "I'm not the one who cut down the trees. I recycle," I said. Sam strolled over and lay in a patch of sun. She refused to say anything more. She casually washed her ears. Was that a symbolic gesture? That evening, there was a snippet of news about climate change on TV. "You don't believe that's the whole story, do you?" said a voice in my head. I groaned and spotted Sam laying on the back of the loveseat where she loved to watch the birds at our feeder outside. Her luminous eyes were turned on me. "Books," she said, and turned back to the window. That's when I remembered her remark earlier that day about not being able to read. I didn't know how the mind reading thing worked and wondered if she planned to listen in while I was reading. I never knew. But over the next year, I read books by Hansen, Gore, McKibben, Pollack, LaPay, Linus, Klein, Wallace Wells, and others. That left me both frightened and hopeful. There were a lot of environmental organizations and volunteers who were doing things to save our planet. I decided to join in and become a volunteer and donor of the Area Sierra Club. It may not be enough. If we can't get money and special business interests out of government, but I'm doing what I can. Sam doesn't talk to me anymore, but she includes me in her tight circle of acceptable humans.
Please join us next time when we read about a woman who is making a life-changing decision. If you'd like to contact me, you can email me. You can also visit my website, lorrainesiegel.com.